The full moon rises on another episode of Werewolf Gaming, and who doesn't love a good role-playing game? Living out a fantasy of slaying monsters, getting riches, and becoming a hero of the lands. Thanks to the likes of Dungeons & Dragons and classic stories like Lord of the Rings, this has been the go-to fantasy of nerds even before the inception of video games. And in games, it's a classic staple of storytelling and character progression. And today, we'll be talking about one of the oldest, if not the oldest, Western role-playing game on the internet. And it goes by the name of AdventureQuest. Released in October 2002, AdventureQuest is an internet flash game where you create your own customizable hero to quest, battle, and grow in the world of lore. I guess that really makes me a lore keeper. Anyway, the game is just as much a standalone RPG as it is a loving satire of the genre, with quests ranging from fighting the forces of evil bent on consuming humanity, to parodying Leroy Jenkins and the Mythbusters. My personal favorite storyline, though, is the one that unlocks at level 5, in the land of Darkovia. Darkovia is home to two major factions of monsters, vampires and werewolves, with vampires led by Safiria the Vampire Queen, and the werewolves led by the Were-King. Werewolves aren't creative namers. They fight for control of the Dark Forest lands. Well, I'm sure you're thinking, that's the most generic setup I've ever seen. Vampires always fight werewolves. It's common knowledge. Well, by today's standards it might be, but what if I told you that not only was that not always the case, but it's actually a very new horror trope? In fact, in Romania, the word varcolac describes both vampires and werewolves at the same time, sometimes even referring to goblins. This idea ended up birthing the concept of the Vricolakas, an undead creature from 17th century Greece with a bizarre life cycle. The curse begins if either A, an evil person dies, or B, a person isn't given a proper burial. Then the person will rise from their grave as a werewolf, and then when the werewolf dies, they rise once again as a vampire. The phrase, "this isn't even my final form," comes to mind. So if historically vampires and werewolves have been so interconnected, where did this vampire versus werewolf feud begin, you may wonder? Well, in my Castlevania episode, I mentioned the horror comedy Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein. And wouldn't you know it, it turns out to be the very first time Dracula and the Wolfman fight on the big screen, ever! And since this movie is from 1948, it's not a stretch to say that most other Fang vs. Fur rivalries to come afterwards, from Underworld to Twilight and even our own AdventureQuest, were all inspired directly or indirectly by this film, making this trope of fantasy fiction far newer than most people would think. Don't take this as a discredit to the people making these stories, though, because in only 50 years, pop culture has changed the very way we look at vampires and werewolves, fleshing out a feud that, though it may not be as ancient as it's made out to be, is still a fun and terrifying adventure. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Werewolf Gaming. Next month, family proves that blood is thicker than water. But until then, happy gaming, and I'll see you when the next moon rises.